Welcome back to Sessions from the Edge. I see there's a few people chiming in there. And in fact, my last guest, Melissa Goff, has just joined us, which is fantastic. Thank you for last week, Melissa.
Hi,
We talked
Melissa.
about her strokes and other things, which are quite interesting. But this is where I host real conversations with people reshaped by adversity. So they could be titans navigating diagnosis like myself and Melissa and others. They could be carers holding the line for someone they love. Or, like yourself, they could be practitioners walking beside them with solutions. Each guest joins me on the edge of now, that raw moment when identity cracks and something new begins. We talk about what broke, what held, and how they began to rebuild. Because you're not broken, you're being rebuilt. There's something about this whole presentation here that keeps rebuilding me because, I had it all ready, working really well, and now I have to go back to script. So apologies for reading up like this again for the second session in a row. Anyway, each week we look at themes with the conversation based on the chapter key releases of my book. And this week is about the role of identity in healing. And identity is a difficult topic because when it ruptures, it's really hard to decode because it's deep inside our soul. And my guest this week is an expert in understanding the soul. Today, I'm joined by Tara Kabatoff, a guide and facilitator who stands at the frontiers of shadow work, metaphysics, and true self-mastery. Through her Substack newsletters, The Odyssey of Self and The Shadow Project, Tara offers deep dives into the unconscious mind, helping people break patterns, reclaim vitality, and return to an inner sense of wholeness. After years of her own transformation, moving through turmoil and profound inner work, Tara committed to guiding others towards clarity, liberation, and embodied allowance. In our conversation, we'll speak about the moments she realised her life was changing, how she navigates the shadow, and the practical tools she shares to help others step into deeper intelligence and freedom. Welcome, Tara, and thank you for bringing your light to the edge. And it's the edge of now. We're talking about the things that are impacting people now in their lives and in their chronic conditions. So I loved your article this morning. It was about the body catching cold in a sign of, and that was a sign of deeper misalignment. I think that'd be a great stepping stone for us to give people an understanding of how the soul sends us physical signals when our identity is out of alignment. Would you mind starting with expanding on that article from this morning or today, your time over there in Canada?
Yeah, you're from the future. I'm in the past, and I'm a little bit behind you over here. Yeah, I could start there. I actually probably should even explain how the messages from our body works, how our body is communicating with us. And I was introduced to the work of Dr. Michael Lincoln. Actually, I have his massive book right here. I have a couple of his books, actually. And I was introduced to the work 5 years ago when I was going through, well, I was really searching for something, but I didn't really know what until it arrived in my life and cracked open a whole new opportunity for discovery within myself. And it led me down years and years of study and exploration. And in all honesty, when I was first introduced to the work, it wasn't because of my body. It was because I was simply lost, and I had reached the point where I tried so many things and different healing, psychology. I went down all these different paths, and nothing seemed to really give me the depth that I needed in order to understand myself in a certain way. And having the introduction to messages from the body allowed me to really understand my behaviors, the emotions that had been suppressed, the precursors to all of my life difficulties, and the patterns that I had been creating over and over and over again, the stuckness within my mind, and yes, some body issues as well. And it wasn't actually until I did this work that I realized, okay, this actually is not just about healing the body, it's about so much more. And when you talked about the soul, and when we talk about the soul on this level, which is awesome, I love discussing it on this plane, is when our soul is born into this lifetime, when you think of the relationship with your soul, with your higher self, there's no friction. There's no friction. There's no complication. There's no resistance. There's no pushing, striving, controlling, pressure. It just is natural. And we go through our life. We have our difficulties in our formative years. And if you want to carry through from past life experiences as well, it is mentioned in this book too. And that definitely is something I've explored as well. But we tend to repeat these patterns over and over in many different ways until something else happens. And for some, it's that breaking point. It's an illness. It's a sickness. It's something tragic that happens. It's a big, bad breakup that makes someone realize, whoa, I'm living in a pattern. I'm living in something that I can actually change if I look at it a little bit differently. And that is sort of the pathway for people to some of us to go into the explorational phase within ourselves. And so when our body is communicating with us, it is that final communication warning center. It's the final moment that we have to really understand ourselves more, to dig deep, to make some changes, and to reconstruct our life, and to look at what has been constructed from an old way of being, an old way of functioning that feels to be true. We get very familiar. We can create an identity from with our sicknesses and with those stories, and be very attached to them, where we feel that is our reality. That's all we see. And so when we become sick, our identity can become part of that sickness, and we become very connected with it. And it can override our life experience completely. And we become that sickness because also fear is being activated. And there's so much fear with being sick. I don't know if you've ever come across the book, Course in Miracles. Have you ever heard of that book?
I have heard of it. I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tough read, but it crosses over a lot with the messages from the body, and with this this quest, if you will, of dismantling our old patterns and the heaviness that we carry within ourselves, the friction, the fear, and basically the book is, from what I was told, I haven't read into the woman who wrote the book, but she was a psychologist, I believe, and she channeled messages from Jesus, and it was channeled in a language that wasn't English. It was a language that was foreign for her, and so she channeled this entire book, and she kept it to the side until someone showed up in her life to translate it, and it became this Course in Miracles, this big, massive book that really speaks to the differentiation between our ego versus fear, and how fear can really control our lives. And it repeats this very similar message throughout the book of understanding our ego and our fear, and how we can become so identified, or how we can become so enmeshed with our fears and with the reality that we create based on our fears, and lose the relationship with something greater, with trust, and letting go of what has felt comfortable, the fears and the identity, is scary, and it's very hard to do. And so it eventually manifests in the body. And sorry, I'm giving you a long answer to the article that I wrote today, but I wanted to give a little bit of a background in how, lead up, because if I jump in cold with it, it sometimes doesn't have context to it.
Sure.
But so, for example, a cold or a flu or a body ache or a pain or disease is a final communication of deeper fears, or in the case of a cold, is self-avoidance, and avoidance of emotions, avoidance of certain aspects of ourself that we suppress, where we feel that we have to earn our keep and earn love and earn acceptance. So we work extra hard, we suppress our emotions. And I'm just giving a very high level explanation of it. But the behavior, the behaviors become so familiar for us that we live with these behavioral patterns unknowingly, until we can be faced with a cold and we have the tools to look at it differently, rather than, oh, it's just a cold and I'm sick and I got to take some medication and I'll be down for a few days. Now, if I don't get colds anymore, but excuse me, if I do get a flu, which once a year I usually do, I see it as my body going through an adjustment period. And I through that time, I work through it to let it do its thing and to listen and to tune in and to give myself some space to focus on that rather than medicating or pushing through or getting frustrated. And yes, we can get frustrated because this is our challenge, is to break our old patterns of distrust and control and needing to perform and needing to work and sort of this old way of doing. So colds in its physical form is trying to show us where we need to slow down and where we need to trust and where we need to connect and where we also need to connect with our emotional self, our maybe vulnerable self, and patterns that have not been recognized. And this is a very sort of broad overview of it.
Sure.
The behavioral patterns come in as something familiar, but underneath the behavioral patterns are beliefs. So if we have a belief that, this is very common, I am not enough, which I'm sure you're familiar with this,
Yep.
I am not enough. The I am not enough belief can perpetuate many different behavioral patterns, such as overworking, not feeling like we are accomplished enough comparing to others, being in the perpetual state of again, workaholism, perfectionism, being really hard on ourselves, critical towards ourselves, controlling over situations because we don't want to be seen for who we are, because who we are is not good because we feel that we're not good enough. So we continually hide ourselves, we conceal. So there's so many different behavioral experiences that can happen based on that one belief. And then the body is the final communication mechanism or final communication warning mechanism or result. So if it's cold, it's giving you a message to look a little bit inward. And when you maybe work with messages from the body or even self-reflect on some of the key points of what's happening in your life at that time, because there are different trigger points that will activate sicknesses. So it can be something you're going through right now, where all of a sudden you get sick because of a situation you're going through, or it can be chronic, where it's a perpetual cycle that you might be living by that's creating something deeper, the end result of a sickness or whatnot. So
Well,
that's quite fascinating.
I just listening to you now, I'm sort of thinking about going, oh no. So, I've recently, when I say recently, in the last 18 months ago, I was diagnosed with severe heart disease based on stress. But then when I think back before that, the signals were on the wall well and truly decades before. So when our daughters were much younger, they're now adults with children, we're grandparents and all that sort of thing. But when they were young, I'd come to Christmas time. So Christmas in Australia is in summertime. So the holiday that you guys are having right now is our summertime break. And so, as a general manager of a medium-sized business, I'd get pneumonia at Christmas time. So I'd finish work on the Friday, whatever day it was. We'd head up to the beach house up the coast, and a day later, I'd be saying to my wife, "Well, I'm sorry, I've got to tap out. Just something's not right." And because I've had pneumonia before, we figured it out, and sure enough, it was pneumonia. So, and that happened not just once, but a couple of times to me. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's incredible how much the soul and that identity it impacts you physically. I mean, I never believed going through my career, well, like you say, you work hard, you push yourself, you have that imposter syndrome, all those things that come along as you build your career, and then all of a sudden it takes you out, or tries to anyway. It didn't ultimately take me out, but they try to, and we don't often wake up to that, which is really interesting. So what was the personal transformation for you? How did your journey through turmoil impact your identity, and how did it lead to specializing in shadow work and the subconscious transformation that you go through?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was on the hamster wheel. I had built such a strong persona. I'm sure many people can relate to, well, in all honesty, when I was younger, I think it was around grade 9, around age 14, I was diagnosed with a learning disability.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother was like a grade A or Yeah, grade A. Is that right?
Yeah,
Student.
that works.
For some reason, that didn't sound right, but yeah. Um, Top of his class, ended up getting his PhD, and I was a bit of the black sheep. And I was very sensitive, and we had very difficult upbringing. And my brother and I both went into different directions with it, right? So I dealt with it differently. He dealt with it differently.
Mm.
And when I was in grade 9, 14 years old around, I was diagnosed with this learning disability that carried me through and haunted me throughout my entire adult life. And so I went to a private school, which was beautiful. But when I went back into the regular school system, I felt that I was not smart. I felt that I was inadequate. I didn't feel like I belonged. I felt like I was constantly hiding that I had this learning disability that I was told that I had, because I feel because in the past I was also very emotionally affected by what was happening. So I just became disengaged with school, and essentially I went through my adult life trying so hard to prove that I was smart and to prove that I could. So I worked extra hard. I worked harder than, and I've always had a very strong drive and determination, but I think this even made it even more stronger and perpetuated this will and this drive to succeed and to show people that I could and that I was smart and that I was just like everyone else. But in the background inside, I was falling apart. The harder I pushed, the worse it got within myself. I had several addictions, really difficult relationships. My self-worth was very, very low. But again, the harder I tried to strive on the external, I worked with, my background is in marketing. So I worked with a few very large marketing firms and pushed for awards and pushed for these great clients and pushed to achieve and achieve and achieve and have a persona and reach the top. And the more I pushed, the worse I was. But I didn't see that. And it was almost normalized. Like in this culture, it was sort of normal. Like people drank and it was normal, and people were suffering and that was normal, and people were breaking up and that was normal. And it just became this kind of I didn't really see the issues as an issue. I just thought it was normal in a way, even though I was miserable and dying inside. And it just all caught up with me. It all caught up with me to the point where it was about 6 years ago, where I was making constant bad choices after bad choices after bad choices, not listening to the signs and not paying attention. And I had started this more of a searching and seeking for something better in my 30s. So I'm almost 49 now. So 19 years ago, I started this quest of wanting to improve my life. And it took until this final breakthrough moment of me dismantling my old existence altogether. And that's when it started to fall apart. And during the process of it falling apart I don't know if you've heard of the dark night of the soul, if you're familiar with that term. Yeah. So it drove me into a very, very dark state where I had never experienced it was beyond depression, because I had lived with depression for years. This was a complete fracturing of my old life, of my old existence. And what I've learned through the process and studying deeply drove me into the study of the unconscious mind, Jungian psychology, and of course this work of Dr. Michael Lincoln. And then I got into metaphysics and esoteric, and I just was on a quest. I was thirsty and studying and researching. I didn't do anything else. I didn't really spend any other time other than searching and seeking and working on myself. And through the process, I realized what I was going through was a fracturing of my old self, the ego. And it was really, really tough. I mean, I was purging emotions. I was feeling lost. I was going through incredible shifts and couldn't really find my footing with myself. And so that's what led me into the what is going on with myself, and what did I create, and where am I going with this, and what's happening to myself. And the why, I've always been very curious. It just kept leading me into finding the answers and finding the answers. And I spent a lot of time by myself, 5 years by myself, doing this full time to get to the why and to understand it. And that's what drove me into the unconscious mind, where I realized we live by society in our conscious level of awareness. We live in this level of analysis and control and understanding and proof and logic and rationale and clarity, where as soon as we dip into a deeper aspect of ourself or into more of ourself, it can take us by surprise and completely disrupt what has felt familiar. And that's that shattering of the ego. I call it fracturing. So you go through a period of fracturing when you dip into your deeper self, exposing more of your emotions and your feelings and an understanding of more of yourself, the more of yourself that has been suppressed and hidden for a long time. So that was what led me into the unconscious. Anyway, it goes from there. I could keep talking about it on and on, but that pretty much is what led me into it.
So can you explain the concept of shadow work and its significance in the personal healing and growth?
Yeah, shadow. I mean, I stumbled upon it. It wasn't by, I guess, I guess it was part study, but it was more, again, this curious mind of mine of where all of the more uncomfortable aspects of myself are coming from and what it's all about. And of course, in our society, again, going back to societal conditioning, by nature, we are not taught how to understand the more difficult aspects of ourselves. In fact, in society, it's shamed, it's frowned upon, it's sort of uncomfortable. And a lot of us, we grow up and maybe our parents told us not to speak up that way or not to cry or not to feel emotional or not to be angry or not to do this or that or the other thing. And so we shove all of this stuff in and we try to build this outward facing persona of being perfect or having it together and being proper and not feeling outrageous or strange or different, even though in the inside we're feeling like we're completely not like everyone else and we're different and, maybe going through our hardships because we haven't been able to see our whole self yet.
Yeah.
And so the shadow, just by default, I stumbled upon, of course, the work by Carl Jung and my own work. And again, the messages from the body and going into the deeper aspects of myself, I realized how integral the shadow is to understand our whole self. You have to go through the most uncomfortable aspects of yourself to find who you are. The shadow is kind of the gatekeeper of our higher self, of our light, right? So
And
that's what is the...
What are the traits of the shadow? What are its, if you were to create a box that is the shadow in terms of a description, what is it?
Yeah, it could be our anger, it could be our fear, it could be how we see and perceive. It shifts our perceptions on reality, where we can tend to look at the world as a bad place, and we can look at the certain aspects of others that represent aspects of ourselves that we are most uncomfortable with or that we have hidden within ourselves. So the mirroring effect or projection onto others of what we most dislike within ourselves. Shame is in there, what we are most ashamed of, what we tend to conceal. And even if I also discovered the more I've been working towards my authentic self and towards my truth, the scarier it is, because it also invokes a lot of traumatic responses and fears of what if I speak my truth? What if I'm in my light? Am I going to get punished? Is something bad going to happen? So reliving some of those memories from the past and walking through them and leaning into them to trust myself more and to trust who I am and that I am safe in being who I am. So all these aspects, these avenues of discomfort and fear are actually avenues to our greatness and to more of ourself. But again, when we reach these avenues or reach these aspects of ourself that are uncomfortable, our unconscious mind, subconscious mind triggers a response that it's not safe, that it's wrong to feel that way or to act that way. If someone, maybe there's an unconscious mechanism or unconscious response of rage or anger or hatred towards someone or towards oneself, and they feel it. Instead of seeing where it's coming from or leaning into it, they may feel so bad that they feel that way. Oh, I can't believe I said that to someone, or I can't believe I'm acting like that. Okay, just let it go and let it, just ignore it and shove it down even further. And
Yeah.
anger, according to the work of Dr. Michael Lincoln, leads to inflammation. So when we shove our emotions down, what comes up within our body is inflammation. It can be any kind of inflammation. And I also experienced that firsthand when I was shoving my anger down and suppressing it and ruminating on it and letting it simmer under the surface. It eventually showed up in my body. So yeah, it's quite powerful.
It is very powerful, and inflammation is, one of the key issues that I had, and I suppose it wasn't just anger, but also emotion, in general. When I was being confronted, so I'd be in negotiations, international negotiations, and you'd have to hide any emotion and any feelings and so forth because you're dealing with a project and so on that you're trying to achieve an outcome with, and so you have to oppress that and you hold it down inside. Is that what shadow is? Are those feelings, those emotions, are they building on the shadow, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. It's whatever creates discomfort. And true shadow work is really understanding why they're there.
Mm,
So really understanding why they're there, where they came from, and to understand the web of behaviors and responses to the difficult side of ourself. So
mm,
again, if we feel anger and all of a sudden we feel ashamed for it, or we're hiding it, or we're maybe creating some kind of projection or physical response to it, instead of allowing for it to unconsciously influence us, shadow work is to be conscious of this and aware. So you can work with anger. There's nothing wrong with anger. There's nothing wrong with
mm.
anything that you're feeling. These are experiences and these are expressions of something deeper. But again, in our society, we're conditioned that anger is wrong, criticism is bad. Of course, we have to watch ourselves, but it's not in a way of being hard on ourselves or being ashamed of how we're feeling. It's understanding how it is influencing ourselves unconsciously. And I did a workshop once for anger. It was called the Rage Club, and it was the coolest. It was actually, I'm not a big workshop person, but it was actually really cool of how to work with anger consciously.
Mm.
So when anger comes up, you can work with it unconsciously, where it's driving your motivations, your impulses, your words. Then you send it out to other people, you send it out to the world, you internalize it and harbor it in. Instead of having it unconsciously influence your life, you can consciously work with it in a healthy way, still moving it and allowing for it to find its way out and expressing yourself in a healthy and conscious way, rather than, again, being influenced by it unconsciously. So it's the more shadow work we do, the more conscious and aware we are of when we're feeling certain feelings or when we're being influenced by certain responses or certain impulses, etc. So yeah, it just allows for greater awareness within ourselves.
Yeah. What I'm finding really interesting in your conversations and what I've read about your project on Substack is that you're not about fixing the darkness. You're not about closing it off and getting rid of it. You're about working with it and understanding it and accepting it, which is something that really resonates with what I'm about. You can't. Your past is the past. You can't change it. It's not going to improve you as a person, but it is your past. It's your background. It's your life. And I mentioned this last week with Melissa that I had life 1.0, and now we're in life 2.0. And the change was, when I was diagnosed first up with prostate cancer, then more recently with heart disease. But ultimately, that life was still there. I enjoyed every minute of it. I wouldn't relive it and hope to do it differently, because you're not who you are now unless you've gone through all of that. So it's really pleasing to hear that coming out in what you're about. And then you talk about So you've got this project called the Shadow Project, and what inspired you to go down that path?
Mhm. Yeah, the Shadow Project I launched actually, I think it was over a year ago on my own website. And I became so fascinated with the shadow. And I really want to drive comfort into exploring this aspect of ourselves rather than
Mm,
discomfort and feeling ashamed for how we're feeling or feel ashamed or wrong. Because again, going back to this, it's a product I feel of being wrong made in our society where we feel that there's something wrong with us because we feel a certain way or because we've gone through our life experiences or we've had certain difficulties in our life, in our early life, etc. And it's nothing to fear. It has sort of this dark, which actually I kind of like in a way, it's my own personal taste, but it has a dark, mysterious aspect to it, which can also, in some ways, lead people to feel it is a bad part of us, that it's dark, it's evil, it's wrong, it's sort of this like uncomfortable part, which it can be uncomfortable. However, my purpose with it is really to drive curiosity and gentleness to embody the shadow or to acknowledge the shadow as something that is not to be feared, that it's something
mm,
that we all have, and deliver micro approach exercises to understand the shadow within one's life. And so I launched it, I think it was over a year ago. And then I found Substack and I have the Odyssey of Self, which I've been working on for a while.
mm,
And I realized, I could probably bring the Shadow Project in here. So I have two Substack accounts. And the Shadow Project is more of a deep, deep dive with working modules and structure and guided meditations and working exercises and embodiment exercises to understand different components of yourself in relation to the shadow. And so there's some deep shadow work, there's educational information, there's sort of the whole gamut. So it's a growing library over there. Yeah, it's interesting
and
stuff.
you mentioned the Odyssey of Self.
Mhm.
It's very much an odyssey that we're going through for ourselves, and that's what sort of sparked my interest in your Substack, and the reason I asked you to join me here is that you've also got a concept called the Body Codex. And
Mhm.
the Body Codex, it piqued my attention just out of curiosity originally because I have a concept called the Trinity Codex. But it is a codex in its true sense. And I'd be interested in hearing your perspective on the Odyssey of Self and how that ties into the Body Codex for you.
It grew into what it is now by just natural organic evolution in a way. So I wasn't sure where I would take the Odyssey of Self at the very beginning. I liked Substack. I was I had the Shadow Project in the background. And then I had all this information about the mind body connection, the messages from the body that I had spent so much time working on. And in all honesty, it took me a long time to grasp how to communicate the work because the book here is it's kind of clinical. It's a little bit difficult to convey the messaging in a way that's simple and in a way that people can digest and implement or integrate into their daily life or into their work. So I've been spending probably the last 4 or 5 months on working on how to get this out there in a way that's simple, in a way that's digestible, in a way that will spark interest, that we can decode our body's messages, that we can understand this web of behaviors and patterns and beliefs based on how our body's communicating with us. And so it was kind of a natural evolution, I guess, on the work that I started doing, and then stepping into the Body Codex of creating a library where I can take the work of Dr. Michael Lincoln and bring it into this Body Codex in very bite-sized segments. So, for example, I would in one podcast, it's a podcast and written content area with exercises.
Mhm.
In each episode, I would talk about one specific body part or a disease, like a cold, for example. Cold would be a disease, but a cold or a knee or an ankle and what they symbolize, and then what the aches or pains mean and the behavioral patterns attached to it, plus exercises to work out of it. So once you know the message of a cold or knee pain or leg pain or anything of the sort. It's working on the contrast. So if we have back pain, for example, we feel that we're carrying the weight of the world, we're overworked and undersupported. Well, what would the contrast of that be? If we're familiar living in this pattern, how do we break the pattern to experience something different, to experience something more aligned and more of trust and flow and fluidity and having the burdens lifted off of ourselves because they're usually self-imposed. So that's the body codex. That's sort of a library that's being created. And with it, I have also the library of light, which I might move everything into the body codex. I'm still experimenting, in all honesty, with it.
Yeah.
But the library of light is more just, it's 1 week of the body codex, 1 week of the library of light, where I talk about things that are inspirational, life changing experiences that I've gone through, more open discussions and actionable steps as well for change.
It's look, I'm really, really enjoying this conversation because the soul is the part of the whole being that is the hardest one to understand.
Mm.
It's the one that has, well, I've found it's the one that has the greatest impact because it not only impacts your own self, but it also then goes on and wreaks havoc around the body physically. And at the lightest level, like your article last week about the ankle, you were talking, you had one there talking about what the ankle represents as a pain, then is how it manifests itself. And that's coming back to the soul in terms of the soul's impact on the mind and then through the mind into the body. You've got some other tools that not many people think about as being tools to help with chronic conditions, but they're actually quite useful. And I've never even considered them. Would you mind telling us a bit more about your tarot and numerology and how it folds into the healing program?
Sure. I didn't expect this to actually come up in the
No, that's
conversation.
right. Well, I mean, I can have conversations. And I do and will have conversations with heart doctors but the mind, body, soul, the Trinity view is about all of it. And I found the biggest changes, the biggest impacts were when I started working on the soul. And literally the book, when I was writing the book, I was about, 2/3 of the way into writing the book and I still hadn't solved the soul part of it. Mind, that was easy to write. Body, that was easy to write and understand. And the writing was in parallel with actually trying to decode my own heart disease condition that was actually quite close to taking me out. I was about a month or 2 months away from dying, literally.
Right.
And then I figured out the soul. Well, didn't totally figure it out, but I started to say, oh, hang on, now I've got something for it. I know where to go with this now. And so tarots and numerology, that's a whole different level that I'm not familiar with. So please expand.
Yeah, thank you. Well, when I was going, again, 5 years ago, leaving my corporate marketing career life, old life, I ended up landing in a place where it was very spiritual location. I was actually at my mom's place, but she lives by a small city town where there are a lot of healing practitioners. It's very spiritual. And so when in Rome, I decided to pick up a tarot deck. And actually at the time I was watching YouTube tarot videos and I was blown away at how every time I watched a reading for my astrology sign, it would be so accurate. I was just completely mesmerized by these videos. And so I thought, well, I'll pick tarot up and just check it out. What is this all about? And I started researching and studying and I went down into the rabbit hole and completely became very immersed in the study of tarot and the meaning behind the cards. And every card that I was reading, studying up the higher polarity, lower polarity, all the meanings behind, I mean, they're loaded with information, each card. I realized that this has been my life story and the symbology and the meaning behind the symbols represented so many experiences that I had faced. And I was completely blown away. And actually, there were 2 times in my life where I felt like I went through a major shift, and this was one of them,
Mm.
where I felt like it was something familiar. Now, I don't know if it was a past life story connected with it, could have been, but the feeling that I got from it was like I already knew it. Like I already knew the information somehow, if it was through my life experiences now being put into words and into symbols, or if it was from maybe a long, long ago. It just felt very familiar and comfortable for me. And I kept moving with the studying of tarot. And then I started a YouTube channel actually and got into that for a while. But I also was actually, I think numerology, I learned it beforehand years ago, but I never really dove into it in the way that I did during this time where I needed to learn how it worked and the true essence and meaning of tying numbers together, where numerology came from. And so I studied this as well. And when we understand symbols, and goes into the collective unconscious as well. So symbols can be used to understand ourselves deeper. And through tarot and through numerology, I was able to understand myself in a way that I hadn't been able to understand before. And speaking of symbology and decoding, you can use tarot and you can use numerology and even astrology to decode parts of your soul's path, your soul's journey. If you want to get really into, there's a friend of mine who she's a practitioner in depth astrology. I think it's called depth astrology, where she looks at some of the outer planets to understand your soul's mission, your soul's drive and quest, and even your big karmic lessons that you have to learn in this lifetime, if you want to call it that. So, nonetheless, this whole avenue of esoteric studies, learning symbols, learning the meanings behind it, allowed me to understand myself even more. And that's when I really cracked open I would say the spiritual side of myself, the side that had been, like you said, is a side that of ourself that can be very difficult to understand, especially if we haven't been used to connecting with it. And I think we can connect with our spiritual side at any time throughout life, but when we dive into parts of ourselves that we haven't really given that much attention to, we can really open it up. And that's where I feel a lot of people have very life-changing experiences and a lot of big breakthroughs, is because they're opening up more of who they are and more dimensions within ourselves. So symbology, numerology, tarot, astrology are all really amazing tools to understand our unconscious and to understand our soul's blueprint, our evolutionary process, even to understand times when we can't quite make sense of things. We can go into numerology, we can pull some cards, and we can get some information from our unconscious, where our unconscious is communicating with us all the time through ways that we're not used to understanding. So if it is through our psychic self, if it is through dreams, if it is through intuition, if it is through our feelings and our senses, those are all aspects of ourself that we have access to. And the more that we work with it, the stronger that they will become. So, yeah.
It's an issue because I'm an engineer by trade, and so
Yeah.
for me, that's it's a whole area I've only just recently opened up to. When I say recently, in the last 18 months, and it's a whole new level it's actually quite good. I mean, my wife and I went to India in January, and we went to the Heartfulness Center in Hyderabad, and we spent 2 weeks just meditating, doing yoga, and really exploring the inner self and Ayurvedic medicine and all those sort of things. And it's that exploration of self that really makes the difference. We can go and get ourselves medicated. We can go and get ourselves intervened and have operations and things. We can go and talk to psychologists and psychiatrists. I've done all of that. But there's very few people like yourself who are out there actually working with people's souls. They want to turn it back into psychiatry or other things, as opposed to, just getting into the raw self and dealing with those sort of situations. So that's what you do, and that's why you did it. But what about your people, your clients that you work for? What sort of experiences have you encountered with them, and what breakthroughs have you had with them?
Well, so many. I mean, with regard to the tarot, and I depending on the person and what they're comfortable with, I can interweave or weave in the metaphysical aspect. So looking at the tarot, understanding their numerology and understanding a little bit of astrology, just to get an idea of aspects of themselves that they might not be able to see or understand.
Mm.
And I should mention for example, the messages from the body, when I work with people in regard with the messages from the body, and even with tarot, when we have a moment, and I'm sure you're very well aware of these moments where you have an aha moment, where you see yourself deeper or you understand yourself in a way that you haven't been able to see before, that in itself is a very incremental click and transformational period. So when we are able to have those aha moments, those breakthroughs, those insights, if it is someone delivering us the information, or if we find it within ourselves, that alone is incredibly transformational. And I feel never, ever underestimate those moments. When you can look at yourself differently, when you can see something within yourself and within your life differently, when you turn things around and you explore and you get that breakthrough, that aha moment, that's a release. That's a shift of consciousness. That is a change in your body. That is an awakening of your soul. That is a shift in your mindset. That is an opening of your emotional self. And so it depends on the person, and it depends on really where they're at. I've had one person I worked with who had chronic heart issues. They were in the hospital constantly, and I could tell that there was a lot of fear behind it. The fear was driving the worry that they would have heart complications, heart attack, etc. I mean, they were in the hospital a lot. And after quite a bit of work with messages from the body, again, when passages are read, when you go into, or when you expose the patterns and the behavioral patterns, the beliefs behind them, where this condition originated, you're giving a person an opportunity to see themselves differently, to see themselves in a way that they haven't been able to see before. Now, I've had situations where I have done this work and I've run into their ego, and their ego doesn't want to hear that information and doesn't want the truth to be seen or heard or understood. So they shut down, or they get defensive, or they get uncomfortable and they want to end. But through work, in this one case with a person with regards to the heart issue, the heart condition, their heart condition ended up subsiding altogether. And over time, they stopped going to the hospital and calling the doctor and talking about their heart. And I approached them. I said, "Do you realize that you're not talking about your heart anymore?" And they didn't even notice it. Because what happens, and what I've noticed in my own change too, is when we shift, the shifts happen so subtly, or they can be big, but they also can be quite subtle, where all of a sudden we may realize, oh my God, I'm not reacting the same way I used to, or that pain is all of a sudden gone. It's almost as if a memory evaporates and it just goes poof. Like even I was remembering back to when I was really struggling, going through really, really hard times, and it almost seems like it didn't exist. It seems like it was so long ago, and I try to kind of not hold on to it, but remember it so that I can help others and not forget what it felt like, because I know what it's like to go through those really, really hard times. So I've worked with people who've had chronic health issues, who are just looking for a solution or looking for an answer, shedding light on those aspects that they're looking for. I find with regard to the tarot, for example, when people book a reading, it's kind of funny. They already know. And so I give them a reading and they're like, "Yep, that's confirmation. I had a feeling." And so we do know deep down. But sometimes we also need someone to make it clear, give us that confirmation in a way of something that we know deeper. So the cases that I worked on, again, a wide range of chronic health, and it all depends on the person. It all depends. I mean, there's no same story, but there are common threads with some of the underlying, I guess, difficulties or the beliefs, the core beliefs that we can have within ourselves.
One of the things I've noticed in a lot of your commentary is about fear and transcending fear. So what strategies do you recommend for individuals to confront that fear and transcend it?
Yeah, it's first understanding what the fear is. So when we say fear, we can almost consider fear being a blanket statement, but fear has many different faces. We can be afraid of love. We can be afraid of being vulnerable. We can be afraid of hurt. We can be afraid of the future. We can be afraid of the unknown. We could be afraid of our power. So it's really first identifying what the fear is and how it is influencing your life. If it is a fear of being hurt in love, maybe there's a fear of being vulnerable and opening your heart. Maybe your body seizes up and you clamp down and you become really defensive with regards to sensitivities and love. So there are many different mechanisms that can be inspired by or influenced by fear. And when you understand how fear is, I guess, taking form in your life, you can work on the contrast of it. So what if, or how would your life be and how would you feel if that fear didn't exist? So we get very comfortable living with a fear. We get very comfortable being guarded. We feel very comfortable being afraid of the future. We might self-sabotage ourselves. We may worry and ruminate about the future. We may think about financial loss and struggle and lack and scarcity, all these different phases of fear. So what if you didn't live with those experiences? And how is it manifesting in your body? How are you feeling on a physical level, a spiritual level, a psychological, mental level, and an emotional level? And then how is it, again, inspiring your behaviors? What are your behavioral patterns based on this specific fear? And then once you can reflect on those components, you can embody within yourself the opposite of it, the contrast. So maybe opening up for trust, maybe opening up for flow. What does flow feel like? I feel trust from what I've noticed across the board and within myself. Trust with life, with the universe, with all is I feel, a very common difficulty that we will face. You know, how much do we trust? How much do we actually trust within ourselves and within our body? If we feel trust, what does trust feel like when we can let go and we can let our body relax and we can trust the unknown? We can put our life in a way, just give our power. It's not like total disempowerment, but the mechanisms of control, letting go of it and allowing for life to happen and trusting that process. And how does it feel within ourselves? So it's feeling the contrast of it, working with the contrast, these dualities of the fear and the trust, or fear and love, people call it as well, right? The closed versus open.
Yes.
What does closed system mean versus open? And then there's also what I call it, the expansion and contraction. So when we expand into trust and love and flow, trusting, our natural response is going to be going back into contraction, back into safety, back into what's felt familiar. So just being aware of the patterns, being aware of, are you in an open, expanded state, or are you in a contracted state? And the more you practice the expanded state of being open a bit more, the micro steps of trusting a little bit more, relaxing your body a little bit more, working on embodiment and maybe somatic practices or breath, and staying open, paying attention to when you contract and then go, okay, I'm contracting, I'm in fear, it's coming up again, that's okay. You just work on opening up a little bit more, and you open it up a little bit more, and then it just becomes more natural as you move through it. Right? So it's quite a process.
It is quite a process. And interesting, you mentioned breath in there. What does breath have to do with, because breath goes across a lot of different disciplines and aspects of the self. How do you work with breath? How do you treat breath with people with conditions?
Yeah, I'm not a breath work specialist per se, but what I've worked with different breath work techniques for myself, and really the essence of life is breath. We forget to breathe. when
Yeah.
when our central nervous system is active, when we're in fear state, if we are in protecting ourselves. And so really simply, it's so simple, just returning to the breath and feeling your breath move within your body. And that helps regulate the nervous system. It helps bring you back into present moment. It helps you bring you back into your body. And it helps you also bring your attention inward into your body, into the whole scope. You can go really deep into meditation and into self-body awareness through breath, relaxing your body and feeling grounded and feeling safe. You can incorporate and these feelings of safety and groundedness. When we are in fear, we're feeling unsafe. We're in a state of feeling unsafe, maybe a lack of groundedness. So breath really does bring us back into that attunement, into the flow with our body and with ourselves. So yeah, just simple. Just even when you're feeling tense or when you're in fear, a state of fear, uncertainty, just simply start breathing. And you might notice where you're holding tension. I remember when I was really stressed, or even just when I was operating without awareness, I noticed that I was holding my breath in my stomach, and my stomach was so tense to the degree where I didn't even know how I was alive because I didn't think I was breathing. Like I was just holding myself in so tightly. And when I finally tuned in and realized how I was holding myself in, I was then really confused how I was even alive because I was so tense and holding my breath in was so shallow. And I'm a competitive cyclist. I've been an athlete. I was an endurance athlete. It was all about breathing into the diaphragm and being attuned with your yeah, and that was second nature. But when it comes to life, when it comes to just operating life as it is, yeah, it's all about bringing ourselves into greater consciousness of our breath.
Yeah. Well, I've got one more question before we share where people can find you. So this is a question that I'm going to be asking everybody. So it'll be slightly different in each instance, depending on whether you're a Titan with a condition or a practitioner like yourself or a carer and so on. But ultimately it revolves around that moment just before, just as somebody's getting a diagnosis, what would they whisper to themselves about the future? And as a practitioner, what would you say to those people, or what do you say to people who come to you just as you can see they're all worked up, they're all pent up inside, and you know what you're going to be working with, or the sort of transformation you're going to be working with, the journey they're going to be going on? What do you say to people at that moment, just when they're just getting started and everything's all...
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a loaded question. It all depends on the person, really, in some ways. But I think it would really come down to having the person connect with their deeper self and ask themselves what they want. What do they really want? What kind of life do you really want? How do you want to feel? And sometimes we don't even know the answer. It's just we just want something better, or we're just in such a bad state. But I think planting that question into someone's consciousness to reflect on what do you want as a result allows them to also find the pathway or open up the pathway for themselves to receive it and to be it and to find it. So sometimes even when we're in the most confused states of being, all we need to have sometimes is that hope. I don't say hope or faith or that light, or just knowing that I just want something better or something more. I don't want to feel pain, or I want to have better relationships, or I want to have less stress in my life. And sometimes it's just that knowing of what could be on the other side can lead to the pathway of change. And sometimes that pathway of change finds us, in strange ways, synchronicity, right? So I feel it would be something along the lines of that, allowing for the person to start the process by understanding what they really want and what they feel their deeper self or their higher self is calling for or desiring or aligning with. Yeah, connecting. I feel it's the connecting, beginning to connect with our higher guidance and understanding that we have that. We all have that.
Lovely. Oh, that's just wonderful, Tara. I really appreciate your time. Where would people go to find more about you, to interact with you and join your program?
Yeah, Substack. So I have the Odyssey of Self and the Shadow Project. My YouTube channel is active as well. So on Tara Kabatoff is my YouTube channel. And my website is tarakabatoff.com. So you can email me at any time if you have questions. But those are the best places to find me.
Fantastic. Are there any questions from the audience? And our audience has been very good. They're here right till the end. Nobody's dropped off, which is a fantastic sign of their interest in your content, Tara. Any questions in the audience? No. Looks like we're all good. Thank you very much for your time, Tara.
You're very
And
welcome.
I look forward to talking to you again sometime. It's been an absolute
Absolutely.
pleasure. Thank you for
Thank you.
joining me.
Likewise, Paul. Thank you
All right.
so much.
See you.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye bye.